morning, everybody, or afternoon if you're in a different time zone. This is Ula Brenna's daughter, and this is Saga Saturday. Our guest today is Hersir Torvaldr Torgarson, and I will let Kinehild introduce herself, and then Torvald, you introduce yourself while I share the link out.
So I am Dam Kinehild, the library, and I am a language aficionado, a fan, especially of dead languages where nobody can correct my pronunciation. Torvald?
And I am Torvaldr Torgarson, and I'm going to be reading, reciting, and discussing the saga of Beowulf with you.
Yay. Well, I will be honest, Beowulf is my favorite Old English poem because it's magnificent, and so this is my jam. So I, carry forth, do your thing.
Awesome. Okay, for those of you that are just signing in, we obviously don't have enough time for me to read the entire poem here. So what I am going to be doing is reading sections of it, and then I will come back with some commentary discussing the way that some of us modern folks have perceived it or misperceived some of what is happening in the saga of Beowulf. So putting it within Norse cultural context. And then Kinehild will actually be able to recite some of it in Old English for us so that we can hear how it would have actually been performed. And then I've got a self-portrait project where I've been transposing the story of Beowulf, not the saga, the story, into Drakvet skaldic verse, which is the formal court poetry of the Norse. Now that's also in English, so you'll be able to understand what I am doing. But the idea is here, reciting from the book, and then letting Kinehild do her bit in Old English and then my bit in the Norse. You get kind of a mix of all the flavors here. You're getting the flavor of the Anglo-Saxon poem and then a little bit of flavor of the Norse style poetry. And so what I'm going to be doing to start with is I'm going to read the introduction, which includes the founding of the Danish royal line with Scyld, his death and funeral, and then I'm going to jump all the way to the back of the poem, and I'm going to go to the burial of Beowulf, because I'm connecting burial here. And then I'm going to discuss just a little bit of Norse burial practices and some of the big misconceptions that we modern folks have about it. So I'm going to go ahead and start here. This is the very beginning. Oh, and for those that didn't see the post earlier, this is the Kevin Crossley Holland translation of Beowulf. Right? It's the one that I'm the most familiar with, and so that's why I'm going to be using it. Listen, the fame of Danish kings and Danes gone by, the daring feats worked by those heroes are well known to us. Skilled Skepping often deprived his enemies, many tribes of men, of their mead benches. He terrified his foes, yet he, as a boy, had been found a waif. Fate made amends for that. He prospered under heaven, won praise and honor until the men of every neighboring tribe across the Wales Way were obliged to obey him and pay him tribute. He was a noble king. Then a son was born to him, a child in the court sent by God to comfort the Danes. For he had been their dire distress and seen it, that once they suffered hardship for a long while, lacking a lord, and the Lord of life, King of heaven, granted this boy glory. Beo was renowned. The name of Scyld's son became known throughout Norse lands. By his own metal, likewise by generous gifts, while he still enjoys his father's protection, a young man must ensure that in later years his companions will support him, serve their prince in battle. A man who wins renown will always prosper among any people. Then Scyld departed at the destined hour. That powerful man sought the Lord's protection. His own close companions carried him down to the sea, as he, Lord of the Danes, had asked while he could still speak. That well-loved man had ruled his land for many years. There in harbor stood the ring-proud ship, the prince's vessel, icy eager to sail. And then they laid their dear lord, the giver of rings, deep within the ship by the mast in majesty. Many treasures and adornments from far and wide were gathered there. I have never heard of that ship equipped more handsomely with weapons and war gear, swords and corslets. On his breast lay countless treasures that were to travel far with him into the waves' domain. They gave him great ornaments, gifts no less magnificent than those men had given him, who long before had sent him alone, child as he was, across the stretch of the seas. Then high above his head they placed a golden banner, and let the waves bear him, bequeathed him to the sea. Their hearts were grieving, their minds mourning. Mighty men beneath the heavens, rulers in the hall, cannot say who received that cargo. So before I go into the commentary, Kinehild, would you like to recite a bit of that?
Yeah, so I'm going to do just the very beginning, probably about the first 11 lines.
Okay.
What way Jardana in Jerdagum, Theod Kuning thrum je frunan, who the Athelingas Elan Fremedon. Oft shield shifting, Shethena Threchtum, Moninga Mayathum, Meado Settler, oft he Edgesoda Eorla, Suthan Erast Weert, Feshaft Funden, he das Frofreie Bad, Hueox under Wolknum, Hueort Mundum Thach, of that he Achwilch Thara Umsitendra, over Hrondrada Huran Schulde, Gomban Gulan, that was God Kuning.
Thank you very much. That's really cool.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
There's another, so that was God Kuning. There's a couple of those statements where it's like, that was a good king, or that was a grim king. And it's just this very declarative wrap up.
It's a very forceful way of enforcing the renown of the person that the poem is speaking about. So I'm going to give you now a little bit of my own work. This will be about the same section that I just did. And this is all done in the Drotlet. I'm not going to get into that because that's a class all on its own, on structure and form and everything else. But you should, again, be able to get a little bit of the flavor of the Norse presentation style. Listen now and learn the lore of Danish kings, the daring deeds of great men dancing in the steel rain. Skilled stepping, mighty jarls scourged to many tribes' lands. Floating free, a child was found on Wales road drifting. Praise he won and power, prospered in his new land. Lord of spear danes, striking swiftly, ever flowing fear among his foemen. Fast the honor holding. Great the grace to him was granted, and wisdom courted. Swiftly does the steed of sails now ride the blooded Hymir, bearing all them honored ringmen able. Many are the men who must pay tribute to the breaker of the rings, born to benches of the mead hall. Son of skill was Beowulf, strong and honored by the Danes, as daring for the dance of iron as for the gifts from father granted. Grand the renown spread to lands and league of men who loved the Danes or not. Open-handed as to any man was Beowulf. Rings and steel he spared not, spreading to the people. Steadfast they in service, standing in the times to come. The prince will prosper, pleasing all his holders. Yet must skilled still yield to the yearning of the mead bench. Laloskalf will voice, the Valkyries will come, and with the one-eyed skilled is waiting. Einherjar or Ragnarok to rage in rivers of the burning. Raised on shoulders round and rolled with grief, skilled will now take the road he traveled, tossed so long ago on restless waves. The ring-proud reaver waits so eager, patience wars with purpose, proud and tall the bearer. Laid about the loved one, lord of all the ring dames, river fire glittered rich, raised and piled in high mounds. Burnies bright the stoutest battle shirts, as swift as wind the wound snakes yearning, waiting not for calling. No less honor as was on him when he came in times before, when tossed on tides of Wales road drifting, beached a ship of bounty, bearing skilled an infant, tossed from lands no one could learn to Denmark's healing. By the standard held in hail, with Freya's tears and silver marked the sailing. Steed of waves now launching, none there are now living, nor among the wise that nowhere rests in royal breaches all that hoarding. Hear the hoarded wisdom, hearken to my words, now spoken of the Scyldings, swift of deeds and daring. Royal runs the line of regal men of yester. Danger is the draught that drives the boldest onward.
That is really impressive.
They're really, yeah, it's beautiful.
That last stanza is actually what they would call a step, and it's the way in the poem that you break it up essentially into chapters. And so if I were to continue going through this, every several stanzas, you'll hear that same stanza or slightly modified to indicate change of chapter.
Yeah, we've seen that in other works.
Right. So before I go into the commentary about the burial practices, let me jump now all the way to the end of the story, and we're going to be getting to Beowulf's funeral. Let me see. Pretty sure I had it marked. Okay, here we go. So I'm taking this up. This is after Beowulf is already dead. He died fighting the fire drake. And then the brave warrior, Weohstan's son, directed that orders be given to many men, to all who owned houses, elders of the people, to fetch wood from far to place beneath their prince on the funeral pyre. Now flames, the blazing fire, must devour the lord of warriors, who often endured the iron-tipped arrow shower when the dark cloud loosed by bowstrings broke above the shield wall quivering. When the eager shaft with his feathered barb discharged his duty unto the bard. I have heard that Weohstan's wise son summoned from Beowulf's band his 7 best thanes, and went with those warriors into the grotto. The man leading the way grasped the brand, and those retainers were not hesitant about rifling the hoard as soon as they set eyes upon any part of it, lying unguarded, gradually rusting. In that rock cavern, no man was conscience-stricken about carrying out these priceless treasures as quickly as they could. Also, they pushed the dragon, the serpent, over the precipice. They let the waves take him. The dark waters embraced the warden of the hoard. Then the wagon was laden with twisted gold, with treasures of every kind, and the king, the old battle warrior, was borne to Weohstan. Then on the headland the Geats prepared a mighty pyre for Beowulf, hung round with helmets and shields and shining mail in accordance with his wishes. And when the morning warriors laid their dear lord, the famous prince, upon it, and there upon the Weohstan the heroes kindled the most mighty of pyres. The dark wood smote sword over the fire, the roaring flames mingled with weeping. The wind's tumult subsided until the body became ash, consumed even to its core.
Quite the funeral.
Yeah, so what we've just done here is we've discussed, excuse me, my eye's watering up a little bit here. We've discussed burial. I want to go back now to the very beginning. And for those that may not quite have caught the whole reference, I'm going to lay it out for you in the founding of Skild's line. According to the mythology, Scyld was found as a baby on what appeared to be a funeral ship. The Danes had found a very large ship run aground on the shore of Zealand, the big island of Denmark. And when they went to investigate, they found that it was laden down just like a funeral barge. There was armor and weapons and furs and gold and silver and household goods and whatever. And when they went aboard, expecting to find a body at the center, instead they found a baby. And so they adopted the baby, raised him as one of their own, and eventually named him Scyld, and he worked his way up into becoming king. And then when he died, they returned him the same way he came. They loaded up a ship with grave goods, they put him on it, and they set it adrift back out into the sea. Now, the reason I'm kind of bringing all this up now is because what we were just talking about, funerals. What is the most iconic image that people have of Norse funerals?
The burning pyres, burning ships.
The burning ship, right? The burning ship burial. The problem is we have only a single reference to that ever having happened. And it was not a reference from the Norse. It wasn't a reference from the Saxons or from the Franks or from the Celts or from the Germans. It came from an Arab explorer.
Yeah.
And that's it. There are no other references anywhere. I have looked. Now, that isn't to say that the Norse didn't engage in pyres. We just had an example of that being described, and it comes up several times in the sagas.
Yeah.
Typically, it was very early in the Norse period. It generally was about that time that they were going from the Vendel period to the Norse period.
Right.
And not everybody did it. Norse culture wasn't as monolithic and universal as some people might think. Eventually, though, the pyres kind of fell out of favor for the most part, and they transitioned to mound burials or ground burials. But ships played a very big role in that.
Absolutely.
If you were wealthy enough, you were buried in a ship.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you weren't, just a few years ago, they found a Norse warrior buried in a faring, which is like the small rowboat or small fishing boat. And he was buried in that in Scotland.
Right.
But we have no other references to burning ship burials other than that one source from that one person.
And honestly, it doesn't make much sense. Why would you burn your ship?
Exactly. You know. Now, the thing was, the early practices, the reason for the pyre was by consuming you and whatever grave goods they gave you, the smoke was supposed to carry you up to Asgard, okay, to the gods. But again, later on, they just went ahead and buried people. And if you were too poor to afford a ship, they would ring your grave with stones in the shape of a ship. So that all played a really big role in it. And so I'm not saying that maybe they didn't burn people in boats, but we have only one single source. And until I get corroboration from someplace else, I'm going to view that very skeptically.
I completely agree.
As huge an image as that is, I'm still going to be very skeptical about it. Okay, so let's go back into the saga here now. And the next section I wanted to go over. Got that marked. Why is that marked?
Torvald,
sorry, I'm a little disorganized here, more than I wanted to be. Okay, this section is, it picks up on Grendel. And the thing about this is, I didn't get into this at first. I was going to talk a little bit about the history of the saga of Beowulf. The saga of Beowulf was written sometime between the 7th and 9th centuries. Scholars are arguing and debating all over the place about when it was actually started and when it was actually finished. So you got about a 200-year stretch that everybody can make an argument for. It is an Anglo-Saxon poem. There's absolutely no denying of that. It's written in an Anglo-Saxon form. It was found in an Anglo-Saxon area, written by an Anglo-Saxon Christian monk. And my personal belief is that the story of Beowulf, though, was a Norse import. Came over with Norse settlers, especially early on in the Danelaw period. And this monk got a hold of it and said, I love this story. Let's turn it into a Christian parable. Let's show how even a hero that didn't believe in God was still graced by God and given all of his powers by God. And that way he was able to actually save the story from being lost.
Right.
And then also make it a religious lesson. And so this section here where it's discussing Grendel, who I believe in the original context would have been a Norse troll of some kind, has been transformed into something else. So let's go ahead and start this. This is, here we go. It talks a little bit here about Heorot, and then it goes into discussing Grendel. Hrothgar, whose very word was counted far and wide as a command, called it Heorot. He kept his promise, gave presents of rings and treasure at the feasting. The hall towered high, lofty, and wide gable. Fierce tongues of loathsome fire had not yet attacked it, nor was the time yet near when a mortal feud would flare between father and son-in-law, sparked off by deeds of deadly enmity. Then the brutish demon, which lived in darkness, impatiently endured a time of frustration. Day after day he heard the din of merrymaking inside the hall, and the sound of the harp and the bard's clear voice. He who could tell of the origin of men from far-off times lifted his voice, saying that the Almighty made the earth, this radiant plain encompassed by oceans. And that God, all-powerful, ordained sun and moon to shine for mankind, adorned all regions of the world with trees and leaves, and saying that he gave life to every creature that walks upon the earth. So those warrior Danes lived joyful lives in complete harmony until the hellish fiend began to perpetrate base crimes. This gruesome creature was called Grendel, notorious prowler of the borderland, ranger of the moors, the fen, and the fastness. This cursed creature lived in a monstrous lair for a time after the Creator had condemned him as one of the seed of Cain. The everlasting Lord avenged Abel's murder. Cain had no satisfaction from that feud, but the Creator sent him into exile far from mankind because of his crimes. He could no longer approach the throne of grace, that precious place in God's presence, nor did he feel God's love in him. All evildoers find their origin, monsters and elves and spiteful spirits of the dead, also the giants who grapple with God for the long while. The Lord gave them their deserts. So very strong Christian references running through that section there. And we all know this area of Scandinavia was certainly not Christian, or not very widely Christian at the time that the story would have taken place. They've actually got the story of Beowulf's time period nailed down pretty well. One of the things about this is the author wrote a description of a battle that takes place on a frozen lake over in Sweden. And the archaeologists and historians have been able to pinpoint where that lake is and when that battle took place. And so the story is, so the story is basically coming from around the 7th century, I believe.
Okay.
You can actually, I was going to have that for you as as where you can find that reference, but if you just Google Beowulf battle at the ice lake, the name of the lake will pop up very quickly, and it'll give you a little bit of the background of how they found it and identified it. So it did a really good job of dating the story of when the story took place. So I did do a little bit more. Oh, Kinehild, did you want to do a little bit of that in the Old English?
Yeah, I can. So I'll grab a little bit here out of the start of when Hrothgar builds Heorot. Thar was Hrothgar, hersped Gufin, Huigis Weorthmund, that him was Wina Magas, Yorna Huradan, Othathat Seo Yeogoth Yeweox, Magodricht Mitchell. Him on Maud Bay Aren, that Heelredje, Hatan Wolde, Meod Arna Mitchell, Menje Wirkian, Thona Uldo Bern, Afra Jefrunan on Thar on Inan Eel Yeeldan, Yeogonum on Ealdam Swilchim God Seelde, Buton Folkskara, on Freom Gumina. So that's the bit about where they're building, he's handing down the orders to build the hall, and it's meant to be a wonder of the world forever.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to do a little bit, again, from my Beowulf's Drapa, and it's going to pick up pretty much where I did in the original saga. And the thing about my transposition is I'm trying to return it to as close a version of a Norse story as it would be. So they're not going to have all the Christian references in here. This would be like the settlers bringing the story over originally. Now, I'm not specifically using the right poetry form to do that. Okay, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit here when I get to the part in the poem where Beowulf's being praised for killing Grendel. But this is the drop that is the formal poetry would have been done in the feasting hall in front of the king and his men, and would not necessarily be a narrative type of form for telling a story in. So here's where I started in the poem. All the hall of Hrothgar, heights unseen it rises. Lofty reach the rich and regal carvings gilded. Gift and craft are granted grand from distant princes. Herald gleaming herald heroes to the Scyldings. Time will come when touches terror of the birches, raging through the rafters, roasting all the trestles. Deadly deeds from father, dueling husband of the daughter, embers orange, open coals still glowing. Horror came to Harold, hard on feet so brutish. Nightly feasting gnawed on nerves of trollkin horrid. Golden voice that glides from gilded harp and singing, burning pain, the beating breast of mournful Grendel. Honor of the Ringdanes, envied hateful Grendel. Prowler of the putrid pits of fen and moorland, cursing love and laughter, longing ever darkness. Spiteful Grendel stalks to steal the life of Harold. Deep the Danes were sleeping, doughty, resting heedless. Bounty of the bees they had bore and hoarded greatly. Long labored the mighty, lifting oryx spear to bring the battle to board so stressed and straining. Greedy Grendel reaches, grasping things unnoticed, plundering the pride and power of the Scyldings. 30 for the thirst, no thought of sating. Night will cover carnage, milk of corpses staining the mead hall. Dawn brings doubt and fear in drawing light of morning. Heavy is the heart of the hero king, born for naught. Sorrow is the service seen in Harold, wept for honored thanes who often open boastful feasting. Brave did Grendel siege the great hall, quiet in the night so dark, and naught will need and horror sate him. 10 and 2 the years-long tumble, thorn and ash no hand could bear, that cleaved the bone and cage, garbed in hide and scale. Hear the hoarded wisdom, hearken to my words, now spoken of the Scyldings, swift of deed and daring. Bearing hardship boldly, beating hearts and hardy, danger is the draught that drives the boldest onward. So once again, that last stanza was the step, the chapter break. And slightly modified from the first time that I used it. And that's actually fairly common on the longer poems that have those steps, just like a line or two change as you're going. So there's not a whole lot else to discuss on that part per se, other than, as I said, it was turned into a Christian parable. Let's move on to, don't worry folks, I am not gonna skip the battle. Everybody wants to hear Beowulf fighting Grendel, so we're definitely gonna have that included here. I had it marked. My mark must have fell out. Yeah, my mark fell out. Okay,
Oh.
Give me just a second here.
Anyways.
So while you're looking, do you mind if I go back to the end of the poem and do a little bit of the Old English? That's some of my favorite imagery.
Oh no, absolutely. Please go right ahead.
So this is lines 3148 through 3155, and I'll read the Old English and then I'll kind of explain why I love it so much. Higum unrota, mod kera manadon, mon druchnes quelm, swolchla yilmor jud, jetische meola, bunden herda, song sorgherg sada jeneacha, that heo hura herjonges, herda onreada, wilfulla worn, werders edsean, hundtho und hafte nud. So there's an element, there's a piece of that, one half of a line is actually missing, so we don't have the whole thing. But the way that Seamus Heaney translates that is, they were disconsolate and wailed aloud for their lord's decease. A Geat woman too sang out in grief, with hair bound up she unburdened herself of her worst fears, a wild litany of nightmares and lament. Her nation invaded, enemies on the rampage, bodies in piles, slavery and abasement. And so I'm a huge Tolkien fan, as I think are many of us I think all of us in this little video chat. And the imagery of Éowyn at her cousin's burial, as she and the way that it was done in the Peter Jackson movies, where she cries aloud and sings this very mournful
Mhm.
in Anglo-Saxon song. If I remember right, that one's pulled from The Wanderer. But it's just this, you can kind of see that, like, her hair is tied up in the in a head wrap, and she's just facing this loss and lament, and and it's just it's such a human moment in such a fantastical story. That, anyway, that's my personal, one of my personal favorite bits in here.
Love it.
Okay, I found the spot.
Great.
Found where I was going to start. And there was one little section I want to do before that. I just had my finger on it. How did I lose it again? There it is. Okay. So skipping ahead now here, Beowulf has landed in New Zealand. He's already introduced himself to the door ward and been allowed to go into the hall. And they've already got the feast going. He's explained why he's there. There's about a page or so of Hrothgar thanking God and thanking Beowulf that he's shown up. And there's one person, though, that isn't all that happy with Beowulf showing up. We all kind of know this little spot here. And it reminds me very much of Tolkien. We were just talking about that scene where Gandalf shows up at Theoden's hall, and Theoden is still under the spell of Saruman, and sitting down at his feet is Grima Wormtongue. We got a very, and I'm pretty sure that this may be the scene that inspired Tolkien to write that one scene, if nothing else. All right, so I'm going to pick it up here just about a paragraph ahead of that. From there he saw his own country, the land of the Brondings, who loved him well. He went to his fair stronghold, where he had a hall and followers and treasures. In truth, Branstan's son fulfilled his boast that he could swim better than you. So I am sure you will pay a heavy price, although you have survived countless battle swords, savage swordplay, if you dare ambush Grendel in the ways and watches of the night, Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow. He replied, truly, Unferth, my friend, all this beer has made you talkative. You have told us much about Breca and his exploits, but I maintain that I showed the greater stamina, endured hardship without equal in the heavy water. Some years ago, when we were young men, still in our youth, Breca and I made a boast, a solemn vow to venture our lives upon the open sea, and we kept our word. When we swam through the water, we each held a naked sword with which to harbor off the whales. By no means could Breca swim faster than I, pulled away from me through the press of the waves. I had no wish to be separated from him. So, for 5 nights we stayed together in the sea until the tides bore us apart. The foaming water, the freezing cold, day darkening into night, until the north wind, that savage warrior, rounded on us. Rough were the waves, fishes of the sea were roused to great anger. Then my coat of mail, hard and hand-linked, guarded me against my enemies. The woven war garment adorned with gold. So we have Beowulf boasting, of course, of his great strength and his ability to meet challenges, and Unferth, who is supposedly an advisor of Hrothgar, is really kind of insulting him a little bit right there in front of the king in the king's own hall. And as he gets to the end there, he had made a comment about if Unferth had done any such deeds himself, aside from killing his own kinsman, Beowulf had yet to hear of it. The Norse were certainly a violent people, and they would go to war at the drop of a hat, or the drop of a sword, or the drop of a pin, or the drop of just about anything. But generally speaking, it wasn't a good thing to go against your own family, your own kin. And so killing any member of your own family was a quick way to get you really bad reputation. Mm-hmm. In fact, Eric Bloodaxe, who was king of Norway, was in part deposed and driven out of Norway because of doing that very thing, killing off members of his own family. Okay, so now we're going to get up here to the battle of Beowulf versus Grendel. Then the night prowler came slithering through the shadows. All the yachts guarding Herod had fallen asleep. all except one. Men well knew that the evil enemy could not drag them down into the shadows when it was against the Creator's wishes. But Beowulf, watching grimly for his adversary Grendel, awaited the ordeal with increasing anger. Then, under night's shroud, Grendel walked down from the moors. He shouldered God's anger. The evil plunderer intended to ensnare one of the race of men in the high hall. He strode under the skies until he stood before the feasting hall, in front of the gift building gleaming with gold. And this night was not the first on which he had so honored Hrothgar's home. But never in his life did he find hall wardens more greatly to his detriment than the joyless warrior journeying to Harrowt. The outer door, bolted with iron bands, burst open at a touch from his hands. With evil in his mind and overriding anger, Grendel swung open the hall's mouth itself. At once, seething with fury, the fiend stepped into the tessellated floor. A horrible light, like lurid flame, flickered in his eyes. He saw many men, a group of warriors, a knot of kinsmen sleeping in the hall. His spirits left. His heart laughed. The savage monster planned to serve her before daybreak. The life of every warrior from his body he fully expected to eat his fill at the feast. But after that night, fate decreed that he should no longer feed off human flesh. Hygelac's kinsman, the mighty man, watched the wicked ravager to see how he would make his sudden attacks. The monster was not disposed to delay, but for a start, he hungrily seized the sleeping warrior, greedily wrenching him, bit into his body, drank the blood from his veins, devoured huge pieces, until in no time he had swallowed whole the man, even his hands and feet. Now Grendel stepped forward, nearer and nearer, made to grasp the valiant yacht stretched out on his bed. The fiend reached towards him with open hand. At once, Beowulf perceived his evil plan, sat up and stayed Grendel's outstretched arm. Instantly, the monster, hardened by crime, realized that he had never met any man with so strong a grip. Seized with terror, but for all that, he was unable to break away. He was eager to escape to his lair, seek the company of devils, but he was restrained as never before. Then Hygelac's kinsman bore in mind his boast. He rose from the bed and gripped Grendel fiercely. The fiend tried to break free. His fingers were bursting. Beowulf kept with him. The evil giant was desperate to escape, if indeed he could, and head for his lair and defense. He could feel his fingers cracking in his adversary's grip. That was a bitter journey that Grendel made to the ring called Harrowt. The great room boomed. All the proud warriors, each and every Dane living in the stronghold, were stricken with panic. The two hall wardens were enraged. The building rang with their blows. It was a wonder the wine hall withstood two so fierce in battle. That fair building did not fall to earth, but stood firm, braced inside and out with hammered iron bands. I have heard tell that there where they fought, many a mead bench studded with gold started from the floor. Until that time, the elders of the Scyldings were of the opinion that no man could wreck the great hall Harrowt, adorned with horns, nor by any means destroy it, unless it were gutted by greedy tongues of flames. Again and again, clang and clatter shattered the night silence. Dread numbered the North Danes, seized all who heard the shrieking from the hall. The enemy of God's grisly lay of terror, his song of defeat, heard Hell's captive keening over his wound. Beowulf held him fast. He who was the strongest of all men ever to have seen the light of life on earth. By no means did the defender of Thanes allow the murderous caller to escape with his life. He reckoned that the test of Grendel's days were useless to anyone. Then time and again Beowulf's brand brandished their ancestral swords. They longed to save the life if they could of their lord, the mighty leader. When they did battle on Beowulf's behalf, struck at the monster from every side. Eager for his end, these courageous warriors were unaware that no war swords, not even the finest iron on earth, could wound their evil enemy. For he had woven a secret spell against every type of weapon, even battle blades. Grendel's death His departure from this world was destined to be the wretched. His mitigating spirit was fated to travel far into the power of fiends. Then he who for years had committed crimes against mankind, murderous in mind, and had warred with God, discovered that the strength of his body could not save him, that Hygelac's brave kinsman held his hand in a vice-like grip. Each was a mortal enemy to the other. The horrible monster suffered grievous pain. The gaping wound opened on his shoulder. The sinews sprang apart. The muscles were bursting. Glory in battle was given to Beowulf. Fatally wounded Grendel was obliged to make for the marshes, head for his joyless lair. He was well aware that his life's days were come to an end. After that deadly encounter, the desire of every Dane was at last accomplished.
That is.
What a scene. Right? I'm tense and exhausted at the same time just from listening to that. Like, it's just such a evocative scene.
There's a cadence to it, even in English, that you kind of flow with, and it just pulls you along.
It does.
And,
it does.
Yeah, and so, yeah.
Have you gotten that part into Drop It yet?
Not much.
Because that, when you get that far,
I actually have more.
Amazing.
I'm going to go back when we do the death of Beowulf and his battle with Fire Drake. That I have done.
Got it.
I actually did a shield with an image of Beowulf fighting Grendel, fighting the dragon, and I meant to have it up here. And this poem, which is going to be included in my bigger work, was actually written about the image on the shield.
Right.
And so it's going to be expanded to add to this. But yeah, actually, no, I hadn't quite gotten that far yet. Actually, in the main work, I had only gotten up to the point where they got to the door warden, and he basically said, "Who the hell are you?"
Right. Right.
So,
because there's just something about the Drop It form that really, it flows so well and really carries you along. So
yeah,
if
Kinehild, if you would like to do a little bit of that in there, and then I will do the Beowulf and the dragon part in the Drop It.
So I don't actually have his battle with Grendel marked in my. I mean, it's highlighted in here. So I am flipping. Do you have line numbers by any chance?
Actually, in this translation, they didn't number it by lines, unfortunately.
Okay. Oh, well, here we go. He proceeds to behead Grendel's corpse. All right, so this is a little bit starting at 1570, where he proceeds to behead Grendel's corpse. Líka se leoma leocht ina stod efna swa of hefna hadras shineth rodres candle he after rachla what huerf tha be huala huapen hafnada herde be hiltum hielakastein uro und arad nas seo edgefrakod hilde richna ac he hratha wold grendele forglen gudurada fela thara they he yewochte to westenom ofter michle thona on anna seat thona he hrothgaras heroth jenetas sloch on swefte slappende frat focus degena 15 men und other swilche ut ofreda lathitulak. So that's the part where he's talking about the light appeared and the place brightened as the way the sky does when heaven's candle. And heaven's candle is a fun one because you can find a pretty obvious candle in Old English.
Sure.
And then Hygelac shows up, and then you've got Grendel is obviously cognate in. I mean, it's the Old English term that we've just adopted into modern English. So it's kind of, it's a neat section. You've got his house guards. You've got, you have 15 men or 50 men, and all that business.
Awesome.
Okay, so here's the droplet piece I had of Beowulf fighting the Fire Drake. And This one is a standalone piece that I call Beowulf Skildspa, which means Beowulf Shield Poem. And it's being incorporated into the larger work and will be extended on. But this is, it's his battle with the fire drake. Alone, the ancient lord offers steel in payment to via viper seeking vengeance for its treasure. Arm-slung iron wall hangs eager for his defense, wielding wicked tongue of war to sate it thirsting. Woe the world that lost a warrior of glory, so gains Gelnir's army greater to Valhalla. The grave guardian's rage gathers strength from fury, out charges to challenge champion of heroes. The gory maw gapes and ghastly heat rises up. Furnace flares and billows forth the child of Surtur. Best of men, mighty lord, master of the yachts, brings to bear strength unknown beyond the child of smiths. Shards shimmering glisten shower like teardrops, failed the faithful servant fallen in the battle. Bold Beowulf, ever bane of serpents, trusts now power of his own to overcome the grave lord, gripping tight grasp hands that Grendel lost an arm to. Fire fails the worm, tasting fear within its gullet. Woe the world that lost a warrior of glory, so gains Gelnir's army greater to Valhalla. Kin comes to aid liege lord, covered underneath the wheel of Hild, held by hand that succors kingdoms. Fierce they fight by will, and fell they are together. Yet the worm yields not to yearning death's cold embrace. Cunning serpent strikes and seizes neck, and grinning toothy jaw in triumph, terror grips the kinsman. Brave Beowulf has a bite his own. From scabbard drawn the dagger sweeps and drives away life's sweetness. Woe the world that lost the warrior of glory, so gains Gelnir's army greater to Valhalla. Too late the worm leaves life in battle glory. Poison pulses in the pale throat of Yacht's lord. On the cliff's cold barren cairn he will rise above, Bifrost bravely crossing Beowulf to glory.
Wow.
So, condense that a bit, but as you could hear the breakup of the step. It had introduction, step, body of discourse, step, and then ending. Right. So a drapa in its simplest form would have 3 sections to it, but it could be longer. And my main work is 30 years of growing and rewrites. Okay, so let's move on here. How much time do we have left yet?
10, 15 minutes.
Okay. I just want to make sure we get up into some of these other parts here. We covered at least the really good parts. We covered his battle with Grendel, his battle with the dragon. Although when I did his funeral, I didn't read the original battle with the dragon. So let's jump ahead to that. We were just talking about it. Right, here we go. Not sure how far back I want to start this, but there was a small section that, where is it? Now, for people that may not know entirely the story here in the part of Beowulf versus the fire drake had been sleeping peacefully all by itself, minding its own business, when a person stole in, probably a thrall, although in here it says slave, and steals something from it. And he did that because he had just been beaten by his master. His master was mad at him. When he ran off, tried to find a place to hide, he accidentally stumbled onto the dragon's hoard and thought by bringing back a piece of that hoard, it would make his master happier and he wouldn't beat him again. And unfortunately, of course, that ticked off the dragon, who then came out looking for vengeance. And so when Beowulf rides out there, he goes out there with himself and 11 of his best men to, a total number of 12. Right. But when they take the thrall with them, That increased the number of the company to what? 13. Okay? People make a big deal about the idea that Friday the 13th was a really horrible day because of what happened to the Knights Templar. But we know that fear or mysticism of the number 13 predates that by quite a bit. And so even in the saga of Beowulf, which is dated back to the 7th, 9th century, well before the knights were even around, we've got a reference to 13 being a problem. So I just want to make sure I read that little spot, and then I'll jump right into the battle. I had that marked. Well, let's not worry about it. I covered the fact that by grabbing that guy and making him come along, they brought the number of their group to 13. Now, when they got to where the dragon was, Beowulf actually told his men to hang back. And he was going to go face the dragon alone, just like he had faced Grendel alone. And they but they were staying in a wooded area not far away so they could see everything that was going on. All right. Okay, and that's where I'm going to be picking up. Then he addressed each of the warriors, the brave heroes, his dear companions, a last time. I would not wield a sword against the dragon if I could grasp this hideous being with my hands and thus make good my boast, as once I grasped the monster Grendel. But I anticipate blistering battle fire, a venomous breath. Therefore I have with me my shield and corslet. I will not give an inch to the guardian of the mound, but at that barrow it will befall us both as fate ordains, every man's master. My spirit is bold. I will not boast further upon the fierce flyer. Watch from the barrow, warriors in armor guarded by corslets. Which of us will better weather his wounds after combat? This is not your undertaking, nor is it possible for any man but me alone to pit his strength against the gruesome one and perform great deeds. I will gain the gold by daring, or else battle, dread destroyer of life, will lay claim to your lord. Then the bold warrior, stern-faced beneath his helmet, stood up with his shield. Sure of his own strength, he walked in his corslet towards the cliff. The way of the coward is not thus. Then that man endowed with noble qualities, he who braved countless battles, weathered the thunder when warriors' troops clashed together, saw the stone arch set in the cliff through which a stream spurted. Steam rose from the boiling water. He could not stay long in the hollow near the horde for fear of being scorched by the dragon's flames. Then, such was his fury, the leader of the yachts drew out his chest and gave a great roar. The brave man bellowed. His voice, renowned in battle, hammered the gray rock's anvil. The guardian of the horde knew the voice for human. Violent hatred stirred within him. Now no time remained to entreat for peace. At once the monster's breath, burning battle vapor, issued from the barrow. The earth itself snarled. The lord of the yachts, standing under the cliff, raised his shield against the fearsome stranger. Then the sinuous creature spoiled for the fight. The brave and warlike king had already drawn his keen-edged sword. It was an ancient heirloom. A terror of such each other lurked in the hearts of the two antagonists. While the winged creature coiled himself up, the friend and lord of men stood unflinching by his shield. Beowulf waited, ready armed. Then fiery and twisted dragon swiftly shriveled towards its fate. The shield protected the life and body of the famous prince for far less time than he had looked for. It was the first occasion in all his life that fate did not decree triumph for him in battle. The lord of the yachts raised his arm and struck the mottled monster with his vast ancestral sword, but the bright blade's edge was blunted by the bone, bit less keenly and deeply than the desperate king required. The defender of the barrow bristled with anger at the blow, spouted murderous fires as the flames leapt through the air. The gold friend of the Geats did not boast of famous victories. His proven sword, the bared battle blade, had failed him as it ought not to have done. That great Ecthio's greater son had to journey on from this world was no pleasant matter. Much against him will was he obliged to make his dwelling elsewhere. Sooner or later, every man must leave this transitory life. It was not long before the fearsome ones closed again. The guardian of the horde was filled with fresh hope. His breast was heaving. He who had ruled a nation suffered agony, surrounded by flame, and Beowulf's companions, sons of nobles, so far from protecting him in a troop together, unflinching in the fight, shrank back into the forest, scared for their own lives. One man alone obeyed his conscience. The claims of kinship can never be ignored by a right-minded man. His name was Beowulf, a noble warrior, Wostan's son, kinsman of Elfir, a leader of the Swedes. He saw that his lord, Helmintid, was tormented by the intense heat. Then he recalled the honors Beowulf had bestowed on him, the wealthy citadels of the Warmendings, the rights to land his father owned before him. He could not hold back then. He grasped the round yellow shield. He drew his ancient sword, reputed to be the legacy of Aemund, Ohith's son. Wostan had slain him in a skirmish while Eamund was a wanderer, a friendless man, and then had carried off to his own kinsman the gleaming helmet, the linked corslet, the ancient sword forged by giants. It was Onela, Aemund's uncle, who gave him that armor, ready for use. But Onela did not refer to the feud, though Wostan had slain his brother's son. For many years, Wostan owned that war gear, sword and corslet, until his son was old enough to achieve great feats as he himself had done. Then, when Wostan's journey on from this earth an old man, he left Beowulf, who was his with the Geats, a great legacy of armor of every kind. This was the first time the young warrior had weathered the battle storm, standing at the shoulder of his lord. His courage did not melt, nor did his kinsman's sword fail him in the fight. The dragon found that out when they met in mortal combat. Beowulf spoke, constantly reminding his companions of their duty. He was mournful. I think of the evening that we emptied the mead cup in the feasting hall, partook and pledged our Lord, who presented us with rings, that we would repay him with his gifts of armor, helmets, and hard swords. If ever he had the need such as this arose. For this very reason he asked us to join with him in this journey, deemed us worthy of renown, and gave me these treasures. He looked upon us as loyal warriors, brave in battle. Even so, our Lord, guardian of the Geats, intended to perform this feat alone. Because of all men, he had achieved the greatest exploits, daring deeds. Now the day has come when our Lord needs support, the might of strong men. Let us hurry forward and help our leader as long as fire remains fearsome, searing flames. God knows I would rather the fire embrace my body beside the charred body of my gold giver. It seems wrong to me that we should shoulder our shields, carry them home afterwards, unless we can kill first the venomous foe. Guard the prince of the Geats. I know in my heart his feats of old were such that he would not now be the only Geat to suffer and fall in combat. In common we share sword, helmet, corslet, and trappings of war. Then that man fought his way through the fumes, went helmeted up to his lord. He shouted out, "Brave Beowulf, may success attend you. For in the days when you were young, you swore that so long as you lived, you would never allow your fame to decay. Now, O resolute king, renowned for your exploits, you must guard your life with all your skill. I shall assist you." At this, the seething dragon attacked a second time. Shimmering with fire, the venomous vistor fell upon his foes, the men he loathed. With waves of flame, he burst the shield right up to its boss. Beowulf's corslet affected him no protection whatsoever, but their young warrior still fought bravely, sheltered behind his kinsman's iron shield after his own was consumed by flames. Still the battle king set his mind on deeds of glory. With prodigious strength, he struck a blow so violent that his sword stuck in the dragon's skull. A naidling snapped. Beowulf's old, gray-hued sword failed him in the fight. Fate did not ordain that the iron edge could assist him. In that struggle, Beowulf's hand was too strong. Indeed, I have been told that he overtaxed each and every weapon hardened by blood that he bore into battle. His own great strength betrayed him. Then the dangerous dragon, scourge of the yachts, was intent a third time upon attack. He rushed at the renowned man when he saw an opening. Fiery battle grim, he gripped the hero's neck between his sharp teeth. Beowulf was bathed in blood. It spurted out in streams. And I have heard the loyal Thane alongside the Yattish king displayed great courage, strength, and daring, as was his nature, to assist his kinsmen. That man in mail aimed not for the head, but lunged at the belly of the vile enemy. In so doing, his hand was badly burned, but his sword, gleaming and adorned, sank up to its hilt. And at once the flames began to abate. The king still had control then over his senses. He drew the deadly knife, keen-edged in battle, that he wore in his corslet. Then the lord of the yachts dispatched the dragon. Thus they had killed the enemy. Their courage enabled them. The brave kinsmen together had destroyed him. Such should a man, a thane, be in times of necessity.
That, yeah, that's fantastic. I can just absolutely picture, a sword all the way to the hilt. It's absolutely.
That's that, and Beowulf's sword breaking.
Yeah.
They bring up that point in the poem that Beowulf's strength is so great.
So great. He breaks
throughout his life. He was constantly breaking them.
Yep.
That none of them, and that was actually in the Shield poem. That verse, unless you're familiar with the form and you're familiar with the kennings, can be a little tough to understand exactly what had happened. So when I did this part where I said, best of men, mighty lord, master of the yachts, brings to bear strength unknown, beyond the child of smiths, shards shimmer, glistening showered down like teardrops, failed the faithful servant fallen in the battle.
Yeah.
In the main saga itself, there are little bits of kennings in there. The Anglo-Saxons did use them, but they used heights more than used kennings, and I'll explain the difference. In both the Anglo-Saxon poetry form and the Norse poetry form, the skaldic forms, they both make use of something called a height and a kenning. Now, a height is a single word descriptive of an ordinary item.
Yeah.
So you don't call a knife, you call it a tooth. You don't call a spear, you call it a fang or a thorn, okay? A kenning, though, is usually multi-word, anywhere from at minimum of 2 words to call something like a battle wand or a hilt rod or a sword, but they can be an entire verse.
Yes.
With one kenning. I actually have a couple of occasional verses, which is just a single standalone verse, and the entire verse is a kenning for 1 word.
Right.
And that was actually fairly common.
We've gone over some of those, and some of those kennings are so intricate that we were having kenning competitions between ourselves.
Before we run out of time here, a couple things I want to mention for folks who might want to do a little research on some of that. If you're really interested in the Drotvet form and in Norse poetry, a really good book that's written in layman's terms, so that it's just general plain English, easy to understand and follow. It's called The Skalds, a Selection of Their Songs and Poems, and it's written by Professor Lee M. Hollander. Okay, it's out of print, but you can usually find it. I've got about a dozen copies because when I teach my class on Drotvet, I use them as textbooks. They
right.
Them out. And I got them over the years just by every once in a while going on Amazon and looking for it and going, oh, there's one grab it. Yeah, I have been able to get them sometimes as cheap as $10. Now they're getting a little scarce, and they're getting up there $20, $30, even $40. You can find them in a hardbound, you can find them in a paperback. And they cover drop debt very heavily. But the other cool thing is two things. One, in the back, Professor Hollander included some biographies of skalds from the period, including examples of their works.
Oh,
and
great.
so you can learn about that. Also, he keeps the poems when he translates them in the form. A lot of places where you read any skaldic verse or read any of the Eddas, they've translated it into English, but they didn't maintain the form.
Yeah, agreed.
Professor Hollander maintains the form. So it's very much like what I've been doing, where I've been reading the drop-it for you in English. That's what he did.
Right.
So that's a really, really good book to use. If you want to do more research on Beowulf, there's a book called The Origins of Beowulf. And the person who wrote that is, where is it? I had it right on top. Did I move it down?
I think I have.
There it is. Sam Newton. Sam Newton was published in 1993. Boydell and Brewer Limited are the publishers. Now, I don't actually agree with most of his conclusions in there, but it is still very interesting reading. What he does is, by using genealogy and names of people, he believes that the story of Beowulf took place in East Anglia.
Okay.
But given all the place names and historical events that are mentioned in the actual saga itself, there's no way it took place in East Anglia.
So my memory, I've actually
yes.
got the book as well, and my memory is that his argument isn't that it takes place in East Anglia, but that it was first written in East Anglia.
Oh, no,
So,
the right part, yeah, absolutely. I think it's right there.
So, and he connects it to the Sutton Hoo burial and the Wolflings, which is that what scholars have largely attributed that burial to that to the Wolflings cultural group, who were Scandinavian in origin, as were, you know, like when we talk about the settlement of England by the Anglo-Saxons, we often leave out the Utes, who were Danes.
First, yeah.
You know, so it's hard to argue that that Anglo-Saxon England doesn't have a Scandinavian heritage, because when you look at the map, right, like the Frisians and all these, the Anglo-Saxons and Utes, they're all, it's the bottom of Scandinavia.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. The Frisians, the Utes, the Angles, and the Saxons, they were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because to the west of them was Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire, and to the north and east of them were the Danes, who were the most organized of the Scandinavian groups. But they really kind of had to be, because they had the Saxons constantly threatening them, they had Charlemagne constantly threatening them. And so I kind of always pictured this image in my head of pressure coming from the Franks and pressure coming from the Danes, and there was groups that kind of went squirt out up into England to get away from them. Because yeah, Charlemagne, there are some records of Charlemagne having contact with someone that he called the King of the Danes. And the Danes were the most organized militarily and politically, because again, they kind of had to be.
Well, yeah.
And so the Danevirk, which is the wall that stretches across the southern end of Ute land, was built to give them, it wasn't meant to be a static defense to stop anybody, it was to give them time to respond to somebody attacking. And so later period works, Harold Bluetooth built some ring forts near to the Danevirk to help support it. But the earliest dating of the Danevirk shows that sections of it were done definitely during the time of Charlemagne.
Yes.
And maybe even earlier. So, any rate, I don't know how much time we have left, but we covered pretty much everything.
We did, and we're actually pretty much just on time. We try to keep it to about an hour because people have other lives to lead.
People are welcome to contact me if they want. I'll talk their ear off all day long about this type of thing.
Yeah, and we will, just for our audience here, we will, this is being recorded. We'll put it up onto YouTube, onto the Saga Saturday channel on YouTube. Torvald will share it with you so you can put it up on Viking Home Companion if you want. And we also put together a reading list, a bibliography. So if you could give us those books that you noted, we'll add that into the footnotes or into the bibliography. We want to thank you again. This has been fantastic. I'll be honest, I read Beowulf, but I probably haven't looked at it in 20 years. So this is guys are a great refresher and reminder for me. And we're just so thankful that you were able to join us. And I love what you're doing with converting it into Dropvik. I love it. I cannot wait until you finish that eventually.
It may be one of those things, kind of like Leonardo da Vinci never finished the Mona Lisa.
Exactly.
And that may be what this ends up being. But
it's good to have a life's passion.
I love sharing them.
Fantastic. So thank you very much. Kinehild, do you want to?
For the Old English sections, that was great.
I know. She's amazing at that. I stumble over all of the words and she's just blah, 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 blah. I can't even do it. So Kinehild, do you want to tell everybody what we're doing next week?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Beowulf is one of my very personal favorite poems. And so we're going to stick with Beowulf for next week. And we're going to talk about the women in Beowulf, which we didn't really talk about this time. So you have the queens. There's actually a couple of different queen stories. And then Wealhtheow obviously is sort of the main female character and her role. And we'll probably get a little bit into the lady with the mead cup sort of image that shows up in a number of Old English poems and to a lesser extent in some Old Norse poetry, but does show up in Old Norse archaeological finds. So you have, of course, we were talking about ship burials at the beginning of this, and you have the big ship burial in Norway with the two women.
Osberg?
Yes, thank you. I'm like, my brain was not coming there. But part of that, of course, was a very ornate bucket and serving set. And so that gives you that lady with the mead cup, or in this case, the lady serving the alcohol. So we'll probably talk a little bit about that, talk about the female characters that show up in here. And I'm looking forward to it. So
I'll actually do some research so I can keep up with you this time.
Yeah, I would love to get into those too, because they seem like background characters, but they're strong,
very strong background
characters, especially Hrothgar's queen. When she comes out during the feast and earlier, oh yeah, absolutely. Those are some of my favorite sections too. I just wanted to make sure that we got in all the battle stuff, because that's what
absolutely the battles and the funerals and the really big meaty stuff. Absolutely. All right, so we're going to cut people loose. Thank you again to all of our viewers, and we will see you in 2 weeks.